Hi Year 11 and welcome to the feedback video for your second assessment task, which is obviously the business report. I'm going to go through this in a fair bit of depth, so just follow along. I'll start down here actually. Essentially, what you'll need to do in a second is stop this video, read your business report really closely, make sure you read all the feedback I gave to you. This is the most valuable feedback because it's been personally tailored to you. Then I want you to come back and complete, and we'll move on to step 2. So stop the video now and read your business report thoroughly. Go for it. Okay, welcome back. Now we're going to take a step through each part of your business report. And the feedback will essentially consist of 3 different things. There'll be general feedback from me, there'll be student samples, and then there'll be some little feedback activities which you have to complete. So if we just remind ourselves what the actual stimulus was, I'm not going to read this for you, but you can see it there. Fedder Places is a successful organic food company operating in New South Wales, Australia. You should be really familiar with this by now. What you weren't familiar with though were these things here, which were the questions. So on the day, you were required to examine the importance of interdependence within Fedder Places Proprietary Limited, discuss a suitable management approach which Fedder Places Proprietary Limited should adopt, assess the importance of training for new staff employed by Fedder Places Proprietary Limited, and recommend elements of the marketing mix that Fedder Places Proprietary Limited should aim to develop. These 4 areas were actually the 4 areas that you were required to study, and that was in your assessment notification, and we made that really clear. So if there are any of these areas that you were blank on the day of the assessment task, you really need to have a hard think about whether you prepared properly. This, for example, interdependence, I'll get to this later, but it was, if you had clearly read your assessment notification and studied coordinating key business functions, which is essentially interdependence, and I know I told my class that, and Miss Partridge would have told her class that too, you would have had a whole heap to write about. So that's just preparation or lack of. Anyways, we'll move back down to the executive summary now. So have the executive summary in front of you, which you wrote. The key thing with the executive summary, in order to write one, you really need to take careful note of these 4 key questions here. Examine, discuss, assess, and recommend. The executive summary should pretty much set up the rest of your report. It should really briefly introduce the business scenario, so Fedder Places Proprietary Limited. It should clearly outline your approach to the question. So each of these things, examine the importance, discuss, assess, recommend, they need to be addressed in your executive summary. And the marker should be able to read your executive summary and know exactly what you're going to be speaking about in your report. All right, and also one thing which a lot of you didn't do was this: make clear reference to each of the directive terms. So if you want to be really good, if you want to be an A-grade student, and if you want the business report marker to pick up your paper and go, wow, this student really knows what they're doing, use the terminology from each of these questions in your executive summary so the marker knows you're doing exactly what you need to do. So the really good kids use the word examine, use the word discuss, use the word assess, use the word recommend. And taking it a step further, the really good kids know what that actually means. So inquire, for example, means inquire into. If you want to use those 2 words, inquire into, in your executive summary, then do it, okay? We'll indicate to the market that you really know what you're talking about. Same thing with discuss. I'm highlighting it for you now. Same thing with assess, and same thing with recommend. The other thing with which a lot of students stuffed up is in your executive summary, some people did it out of order. Now look at the ordering of the questions. You should be talking about each of these areas in order in your executive summary, okay? If you go down now to the student sample, I'd like you to read this student sample in detail. Stop and pause the video in a moment, and then go down here and reflect upon your own business report and be honest with yourself, okay? What were your strengths in terms of the executive summary? and then what needs improving, and then come back and we'll continue with this. Okay, welcome back. The first part of your actual business report was interdependence, and this was overall done pretty poorly, I do have to say. It was poorly understood across the cohort. A lot of people didn't know what interdependence was, or didn't have it was obvious that you hadn't done the research and you hadn't really prepared clearly for this part of the question. Or maybe you did know what interdependence was, but you didn't really examine in enough detail why interdependence is so important to Fetter Places at this point in time. Think about it. Fetter Places is a big business that's getting bigger. The 4 key business functions, marketing, HR, operations, and finance, need to be working together. They need to be interdependent, literally. Okay? Okay. Once again, stop. Read the student sample. This student sample is a really good one. That's probably the best form of feedback you'll ever get. Read this student sample. It will take realistically about 3 to 4 minutes. Down the bottom, once again, compare it to yours. What were your strengths and what needs improving? Be really honest with yourself. That's how you're going to move forward. Okay, so pause the video. Okay, and welcome back again. The next one was discuss a suitable management approach which Fetter Places should adopt. This is done pretty well. Most students were able to predict correctly that they had to probably talk about the behavioural management approach, and I reckon 99% of students did that quite well. A lot of students also really know what discuss means, which is great. Advantages and disadvantages, excellent. But what you need to do more of is draw each one out in more detail. The student sample down the bottom here, you can see they've got a table there, right? Excellent, advantages, disadvantages, but they don't really draw it out. And what I mean by that is, over here, disadvantages, abuse of freedom. Okay, well, what will that lead to? Why is it a disadvantage? Explain that to me. This one, lack of work being done. Okay, I know what you mean, but that's because I'm a business studies student. But what if I'm a business owner? Why is that? Why is that a negative? Same with this, same with that, and same with some over on the left-hand side too. You really need to draw each one out. The other thing, which students were doing a lot of, is recapping the classical management approach and giving me all this content, this textbook information, which was not necessary. Focus on what the business owners have asked you to do, which is this. If we go all the way back to the top, it's discuss a suitable management approach which Fetter Places should adopt. It's not asking you to talk about what they're currently doing. It's asking for you to discuss a new management approach. Because this came back to bite a lot of students. They did it a fair bit. They wrote about included information which they didn't need. And then later on, when you're walking out of the exam room, you told some teachers, including myself and Miss Partridge, in the days after the exam, oh, we didn't have enough time. Well, it's probably because you spent, some of you, half a page to a page writing about things like the classical management approach, which you don't need. The question didn't ask you to do that. Same thing later on too. I'll get to that later in the video. So pause the video again, read this, and there's a few questions for you to complete. What has the student done well, and what can they improve on? And then also compare it to your business report. What are your strengths? What do you need to improve? Okay, pause the video. Next part. Assess the importance of training for new staff employed by Fetter Places. This is done pretty well too, which is excellent. This directive term is assess, which meant you needed to make a golden word judgment. That's right, and it needed to be sustained. All right, what I was talking about before is that a lot of students were waffling and talking about unnecessary information. Look at this. Many students spoke about recruitment or separation. While it's great that you knew this, you need to focus only on training. Look at this part of the syllabus just here. This question specifically asked you to talk about training. Training, see? If you're talking about recruitment, employment contracts, separation, okay, that's great. You know your stuff, but you don't need to. And you're wasting time. And once again, that's probably why later on in the report you ran out of time. You need to write succinctly. And succinctly means to the point. It will be much, much easier to mark, but also much, much easier for a business owner to actually use this business report. Many students gave 1 or 2 reasons why training is important, but this wasn't enough. You needed a detailed assessment of why training is so important to Fedder Places at this time, at this point in time, and that was the key also. And that shows, if you're considering Fedder Places and where they are at as a business now, that shows that you're using the case study. That shows that you're doing your job. So pause the video. Once again, you know the drill. Stop, read this particular one. I should mention that some of these student samples aren't necessarily A's. Some of them are C's, some of them are B's. They're just random student samples which I pulled out. What has this student done well? What can they improve on? And also compare it to your business report. Again, your strengths and areas of improvement. Pause the video. Last time. Okay, welcome back. Last section of the report. Many students ran out of time and just didn't have enough detail here. Recommend elements of the marketing mix that Fedder Places should aim to develop. If you did run out of time, it's not the end of the world. This is your first attempt at a business report in proper exam timed conditions. So I know, for example, I marked a lot of students who the first part of their business reports were really, really good, and then towards the end they just kind of tail off because of timing and whatnot. It's something you definitely need to improve on, and it's something that you need to test yourself with in terms of give yourself exam conditions at home, and before a similar assessment task, time yourself. And if you find yourself running out of time at the end, you probably need to write more succinctly at the beginning. One thing I didn't mention earlier was that some people's executive summaries were 1 or 2 pages long. They don't need to be that long. They just need to be short and brief. But back to this. Recommend elements of the marketing mix. Okay. A lot of people spoke about price. A lot of people spoke about publicity. But how about the other P's? How about the 4 P's of marketing which you all looked at in class and which you should have looked at as part of your preparation for this assessment task? The directive term, and this let down a lot of students. It was a bit of a weakness. The directive term was recommend. Recommend means provide reasons in favour of. So, identify a strategy, then detail 4 or 5 reasons in favour of this strategy. This is where some initial planning would have really come in handy. If you know what recommend means, the rest of this just falls into place. Because you're just identifying a strategy and then going, all right, reason 4, reason 4, reason 4, reason 4, reason 4, done. Now let's identify another strategy and do it again. Can you see? This person does it okay for one strategy, but that's just the point. They only include one strategy, and I'm guessing this particular student ran out of time. So you'll need to pause the video again, read this particular section plus my feedback. What have they done well? What can they improve on? And finally, your business report, your strengths, your weaknesses. Pause the video and then come back for one last thing. Okay, welcome back for the 5th time. Be honest with yourself. How did you feel about the mark you received for section 3 of your half yearly? You can choose any of these faces. What are the 3 most important things you have taken from this feedback process? Hopefully you've enjoyed it. We're trying to do something a little bit different. And then finally down the bottom, in most other subjects and in most other assessment tasks, you normally get a summative comment right at the end of your task. I haven't given you a summative comment this time. Decided to do a little bit differently with this video and everything else. So using all of the feedback that I have written throughout your paper, plus the ticker box marking criteria and whatnot, plus this video, plus the student samples I've given you, plus the activities, plus your own thinking, I'd like you to write your own summative comment for yourself. It should take about 5 minutes. It really should. Reflect upon what you did well and what you did poorly, and coming from a teaching perspective, do the old feedback sandwich. So 1 or 2 positive things here, and then 3 or 4 negative things, or not negative, areas of improvement. That sounds better. 3 or 4 areas of improvement for next time. Give yourself a summative comment, and then that will bring us to the end of your feedback. You can revisit this video whenever you want if you're struggling to write business reports. One last thing from me, as you look through these student samples, just look at the structure. Okay, this is how other students are writing these business reports. We've got little diagrams, we've got subheadings here, back up here, we've got another kind of brainstorm, we've got a subheading there, excellent work, got a table there. This doesn't have a subheading, so that means that I have to dock them marks in terms of structure. This one here is really good content-wise, but you can see it's quite heavy in terms of writing. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but just something for all of you to consider. If you get an entire business report that looks like this, then it's defeating the purpose a little bit of a business report, in that it should be very different to an essay and easy to read. Okay, thank you very much, Year 11. Bye.